Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me for this webinar. I have listed the title just generically as ETEP webinar because as you saw there are a lot of different topics we're going to cover and I'll get to those in a moment. But I appreciate you taking the time to join me today and to learn more about developing an ETEP and the services that Prosper Sustainably offers. I'm Josh Simmons. I am the Principal Consultant, Attorney and Collaborative Strategist with Prosper Sustainably. And I do want to point out that this webinar is not sponsored and endorsed by the EPA and should not be considered a representation of their opinions in any way. And Prosper Sustainably is a for-profit business that is separate from the EPA. I think a lot of you probably already know me, so I don't want to spend too much of your time kind of going through my introduction and background and history. I want to focus on the content. But I founded Prosper Sustainably about a year and a half ago. I've been working with tribes, other individuals, and organizations. Prior to starting Prosper Sustainably, I was the director of the San Ynez Chumash Environmental Office, and that's located in Santa Barbara County in California. I had a lot of success there in terms of growing and developing their programs, securing grants and additional funding, and growing that staff and department. And I've also been a training instructor for various organizations, including through Prosper Sustainably and doing these types of trainings. But done in-person trainings and workshops as well on behalf of ITEP, ITCA, Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, and other organizations as well. So I guess just a little bit before we move on from there. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. I'll check the window periodically just to make sure. If you're experiencing any difficulties, let me know. If I see that there's a bunch of people experiencing the same difficulty, then I'll understand that it might be on my side. And so if you have any questions, please just enter them in the chat box and we'll continue. Okay, so briefly my consulting experience since working with Prosper Sustainably. It's primarily been with ETEP related projects, but also some assistance with developing a GAP work plan, drafting environmental codes, and grant writing as well. And just to let everybody know, these slides will be in, the materials will be made available after the webinar. So I will send a follow-up email, and I'm attempting to also record this and post this video online as well. So just more specifically, some ETEP related experience. And again, I'm going to be very brief about this, but I've worked directly with the 4 tribes on this. I have a couple pending proposals with additional tribes for some direct assistance in helping them develop their ETEP and related components of this type of project. And also the various trainings that I've conducted. So I've been at both the 2014 and 15 annual conferences in Region 9. With sessions on developing an ETEP and strategic planning. I've conducted a full-day workshop on behalf of Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, a half-day workshop for the Intertribal Council of Arizona, and this is my 3rd ETEP training webinar. All right, so we're going to start by going through an overview of ETEP projects. So just kind of the basic requirements and considerations. If you want more details on these, then I suggest that you watch some of my prior videos and look at the the presentation resources that I have from the session I did just this past October in Reno for the annual conference. So there's a lot of information, a lot of details on this. Then following that overview, I'm going to do a demonstration of the templates that I've developed that relate to developing an ETEP strategic work plan and strategic plan, or overarching strategic plan. I'm going to go through the training series service that I recently came up with and developed and just began offering, just to make sure people are familiar with that opportunity and how that may meet your particular needs. Then after that, I'm going to go through how to address ETEPs within your GAP work plans. So understanding the requirements and managing the commitments, both for developing an ETEP, but also for managing an ETEP on an ongoing basis. So utilizing and updating an ETEP as well. And that's not something that's really addressed in the GAP guidance is that kind of ongoing ETEP work. And then briefly just share with you the other services that Prosper Sustainably offers. There'll be one slide with a list of that. And then afterwards, there'll be a post-webinar survey, and I'd appreciate you completing that and giving me some feedback and let me know if you have any interest in any of these opportunities as well. All right, so we're going to now dive into the overview of the ETEP related projects. So just, for those of you, I think most of the people are aware of what an ETEP is, but I don't want to make that assumption that everybody is aware of that. So an ETEP is an EPA-Tribal Environmental Plan, and it's a requirement for tribes with GAP grant funding that they prepare and have an approved ETEP moving forward. Some of you may have already developed one, some of you may be in the process of developing one right now this fiscal year, and some of you may be slated to do one in the next fiscal year. As far as I know, I believe that all tribes should at least have a draft ETEP, or at least drafted an ETEP by next fiscal year, but I'm not entirely sure on that. So you'd have to talk to your GAP project officer about when your particular tribe is expected to prepare your ETEP. The ETEP purpose and goals, this is just taken from the GAP guidance, and I've gone through this in other presentations, so I'm not going to go through this in detail. I'm going to go through some of the requirements more specifically in a moment, but these are just kind of what the EPA wants to see out of these ETEPs, and it's really this focused on the mutual roles and responsibilities through this joint planning process. So the EPA wants to understand and address tribal environmental programs and priorities and ensure that the federal environmental programs, so the federal statutory environmental programs like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act are being fully implemented. So they want to know the tribe's plans to manage those statutory environmental programs. The EPA also wants to know the tribe's needs for environmental program assistance and resources. And really the meat of it is establishing these intermediate and long-term goals. And then how do you linking that with your GAP grant? So tracking your GAP progress against those long-term goals to be able to measure that. So continuing that, the EPA wants to see the GAP guidance requires a linkage between the ETEP and the GAP work plan tasks. So the GAP work plan tasks must be aligned with the ETEP long-term goals and objectives, and that hopefully will improve the alignment between the GAP work plans and the tribe's long-term goals and priorities. It's really designed to better position the tribes and the EPA to build tribal environmental program capacity through the GAP guidance. The two ones that are highlighted in red, I've highlighted those because I think that's really, for me, that's the crux of it, is this being a streamlined approach, a streamlined long-term planning tool that can be modified as needed, a living usable document that's going to help guide the tribes in their work. And this last one is just, the ETEP to me, when I read this, it's really a strategic planning document, and not just a document, but a system. And that's how when I've been working with tribes, I've been developing it. So I just want to really emphasize that in developing your ETEP, you can take the approach that we have to develop an ETEP. So, just have the EPA tell you the requirements and check off all those boxes for what they require to do it, and then put it on a shelf, and then update it when you're required to. That will satisfy the needs. That'll ensure that you continue to get your GAP grant funding and that you're in compliance with your grants. But I believe that it's most powerful when it's just seen as a living, usable management tool. And I provided quotes here from the GAP guidance itself that really emphasize the intention of the ETEPs to be a living, usable document. So, and that the EPA is supposed to be a partner in this planning process to guide both the EPA and tribal work. So you'll see, I've underlined the really living management tool, streamlined approach to be modified as needed. So this is kind of a different approach, at least the one that I've taken to developing this, than you'll see most plans. Most plans, they're in a Word document, they're a narrative format, they're pretty static, and you're not really coming back to them and making modifications on an ongoing basis. They're not truly a living plan. They're not really a management tool. They're more a reference. They're a process that you go through to kind of assess what the needs are and to clarify goals and objectives. And then that may provide somewhat of a roadmap moving forward, but a lot of times you don't see that being updated on an ongoing basis as circumstances and conditions change, which they inevitably do, whether it's a political change, whether it's change in staffing as a result of turnover, or a change out there in the environment, some new developments occurring, some environmental issue has cropped up, such as illegal dumping. So being able to have a plan that you can change and that is in alignment with what's actually happening out there in reality. So the ETEP, according to the GAP guidance, has 4 required components. The first one is really, as one GAP grant project officer said, the meat and potatoes of it. It's the what is being referred to in Region 9 as the Tribal Environmental Plan, and this is component number 1. It's the identification of tribal environmental program priorities, including the capacity building and program implementation goals. So there's a series of sub-elements to that as well. We're going to go through those in more detail in a few minutes as I kind of walk you through the templates. But that's really kind of the primary component that as a tribal environmental representative I'm going to be focused on is going to be on developing and fleshing out that. The other ones, the number 2, the identification of the EPA program priorities and management requirements is really something that's going to be determined by the EPA. So the EPA is going to provide some indication of what their priorities are, which are probably going to be they're going to be in alignment with the federal environmental statutory programs that are under the authority and jurisdiction of the EPA. So the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, RCRA, CERCLA, so on and so forth. Also, number 3 is the inventory of regulated entities. This is in alignment with what I was just talking about. The EPA wants to see an inventory of entities within tribal jurisdiction that are regulated under these federal environmental statutes. So they want to make sure that they have a database right now of what they know is within the tribe's jurisdiction, and they want to make sure that database is up to date, making sure that they have the entities that require permits, the entities that are requiring inspections, perhaps underground storage tank inspections. Maybe it's a Clean Air Act or a Clean Water Act permit. So they want to know, making sure that they have a handle and they're aware of those particular entities. So they're going to be providing that initially and seeking the tribe's feedback on that, and a tribe could choose to expand that. And then the 4th required component is so you have all, with number 1 and number 2, you have an identification of the tribe's priorities and the EPA's priorities. And the tribe's priorities hopefully are going to involve goals and a series of objectives / milestones that are going to be accomplished or going to be pursued to accomplish those goals and meet those priorities. And this 4th component is about the identification of the mutual roles and responsibilities in meeting both EPA and tribal goals. So where do the priorities, the tribal priorities and the EPA priorities overlap, and how can the responsibilities and roles be kind of assigned and delegated so everybody's on the same page about who's going to be accomplishing what to accomplish the mutual priorities. So going through, and let me just step back real quick. So that's just really a very brief overview. So I do want to encourage people that are interested to go to my website for additional resources. I'll just pull it up real quick, where there are other. So if you go on my website, prospersustainably.com, and you go to tribal, you'll see all the past presentations, videos, and so on and so forth. So if you're looking at ETEPs, click on this, it'll scroll you down to this section, and you'll see everything, including this, will be posted as well. If it has a video associated with it, you'll see the video too. But you can get the examples, past presentations, and other information as well. And you'll notice there's some overlap between all of them. But I kind of continue to enhance and refine and kind of try to have a different angle with each of these presentations, somewhat of a different angle. So a complete ETEP project is, I want to go through what is involved in a complete ETEP project, at least what I see as being a complete ETEP project. So really, it starts with a baseline needs assessment. And this may be something that your tribe has already conducted. And this is a baseline needs assessment for your environmental and programmatic needs. So the environmental needs are what's out there existing in the environment, what are particular conditions, threats, issues, things out there, and then also the programmatic needs as well. What do you need programmatically for your environmental staff, your environmental programs to address those needs out there in the environment? And that may involve preparing a baseline needs assessment report. So if you have one already, it may involve updating it. The projects I've worked on so far have not included conducting a formal baseline needs assessment, but every single project I do requires me to go through the process of doing a baseline needs assessment. So what I'm doing is I'm going through all the tribe's existing information on their programs, on their conditions. I go through their resource management plans, their assessments, their past environmental inventories or baseline needs assessments, maybe if they have a past tribal environmental plan, strategic plans for the tribe and for the departments. There's land use plans for the tribe, past laws, really anything that could be applicable to what could be some particular environmental needs and possible goals and objectives. I'm going to run through all those and organize those. So what I haven't been doing is preparing a formal report from that, but only because the tribe has not requested or been required to do that in each particular instance. Although I am potentially going to be working with a tribe where I'm going to prepare a formal baseline needs assessment report, where I'm going to take that information, take that process I've been going through and formalize it so the tribe has a document that fleshes out all those particular needs by specific areas is how I'm going to organize that. So that's the precursor step, I believe, to preparing the EPA-Tribal Environmental Plan, which is the focus of this. And, you know, the emphasis for the tribe is going to be on the TEP, the kind of component number one, the tribal programs and priorities. But I'm going to go through, you know, each aspect of that as well. So identifying and selecting the priority program areas is where I typically start. And then for each priority program area, your long-term goals. And you'll see some examples of this moving forward when I show you the sample ETEP strategic work plan template. And then pursuant to those long-term goals by each priority program area is going to be a series of intermediate objectives and milestones. And so those objectives and milestones are really going to be sub-goals. They're going to be the steps that need to be completed and pursued to achieve or at least make progress in meeting a long-term goal. And then after going through that process, or throughout that process, is going to be the initial drafting of the ETEP strategic work plan. And then you also are going to need to incorporate the other three components as well. So the EPA's priorities, the mutual roles among and responsibilities among the mutual priorities, and also the inventory of regulated entities, which you get to review and provide feedback on and submit that back to the EPA. And then when you have the ETEP compiled, there's a requirement to obtain the support of senior tribal and EPA officials to formalize the document, and that's really at that point you have a complete ETEP. And I'm going to actually talk a little more about that in a moment. Another step that I see as being really kind of a critical part of this process is developing a strategic plan. So, you know, this isn't necessarily all in exact order. You may kind of work on some of these components together. I would say you may be working on number 3 and number 2 simultaneously at the same time. But having a strategic plan for your environmental department that provides guidance for the ETEP. So the ETEP is more of a strategic work plan that is how you accomplish a strategic plan. But your strategic plan is going to be the purpose, the mission, the vision, the values, and maybe a SWOT analysis and establishing the long-term goals, maybe some long-term overall goals, and then the overlap is going to be those long-term goals for each priority program area, which is really, that's where the intersection between that and the ETEP strategic work plan, where then you have a series of objectives to meet each of those long-term program goals. And now that you have this plan, it's really, as a living plan, implementing, utilizing, and updating it on an ongoing basis is an essential component. And really, that's how you're going to get the most out of this. And that's how I think you're going to potentially revolutionize your program. If you're the department manager or program manager or a director, it's going to make your life a lot easier in terms of keeping everything in proper context and in one place to manage where things are going, and then even as staff members to be able to kind of see what is the game plan, what's the blueprint, where are we going with all this. And without these types of plans and these systems in place, it can lead to just people not being on the same page. As being a formal tribal environmental director myself, I tended to have everything in my head. I assumed that everybody knew what was inside my head. Everybody kind of knew where we were going with everything. But, as I kind of did some probing and went through strategic planning process myself, I started to understand that it was not clear. People did not realize what was going on inside my head. So I needed to get that down on paper. But also, by doing that, I provide an opportunity for people to provide input to get involvement in this plan. So instead of just being my plan in my head, it's a shared plan in a document that's you can update and modify as needed, that really guides all the environmental programs in the most efficient, most effective manner possible in terms of funding, in terms of personnel, staff time, and other resources. And just also in terms of making sure you know what your goals are and you're actually continuing to make progress toward them. So in terms of preparing, utilizing, and updating, that can involve preparing your GAP work plan and doing the annual updates, and we're gonna get more into each of those as well. And then also your program and staff management and collaborating with other departments and organizations that may be also interested in pursuing some of the shared goals and objectives that you have within the plan. So I want to do a demonstration of these templates, which may make some of these things more clear for you as well. So these templates that I'm about to show you are available on my website for download, so anybody can utilize these, access and utilize these at any time. And so first I want to show the strategic work plan spreadsheet, which is kind of what I believe is the most powerful tool inside of this. So just as a reminder, too, the ETEP templates themselves are just one approach. The GAP guidance emphasizes how the development and format of ETEPs is flexible, that the length, the level of detail, and the format is going to vary. So, how long it is, how much information it includes, how many programs it includes is going to vary from tribe to tribe, depending on their needs and their preferences, depending on how many programs they have, how many staff members they have, what's included within the scope of the plan itself. But they do need to address those 4 required components that I did already cover. And so these templates that I'm going to show you are an option. They're not the only way. These templates are completely customizable, so they could be modified to meet your needs. And I am continuing to improve them, although I do think they're probably the foundation of them is there. Like, I think most of the ongoing improvements can be tweaking at this point. And then amongst the templates that I'm going to show you for the ETEP strategic work plan, the spreadsheet is my preferred just because it offers a lot more functionality. I think there's a lot more power to it. So let me show you that example. All right, so here is an ETEP strategic work plan that I designed in my work with tribes, really from reviewing these with reviewing the GAP guidance and developing these to meet the tribe's needs. So I just want to unfilter things real quick just to show you all the areas themselves. So starting off, it's this meets those requirements. Let's come back here real quick, and I'll show you, coming back to these four required components. So one of the the elements under component number one, the short description of the priority. So this is grouped, this ETEP strategic work plan is just an example. In this example tribe, this tribe has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or maybe that was 7. So they have a series of priority program areas, and there's a short description of each priority program area, very simple. For this, and this may be organized differently for different tribes. Some tribe may choose to have the climate be under the air program area. In this case, I've separated it out separately. And as an example, the climate change program area focuses on mitigating the tribe's impacts on climate change and adapting to the climate change impacts that occur regardless of cause. So short, simple description of the priority. And then there also needs to be the tribe's long-term environmental program goals. And that is down here in the second table. So let me unfilter that for you. And so there may be a series of goals for each one. Typically when I'm working on this, there's usually anywhere from 2 to maybe 5, 6, or 7 long-term goals. I would say the average is probably 3 or 4 or so. And in this case, let's just focus on climate change again. There's one goal. This top goal, line number 21, is focused on adaptation, so preparing and adapting to climate change impacts. And then 22 is focused on mitigating climate change impacts, so focusing on minimizing greenhouse gas emissions and other things that contribute to climate change. So these are high-level, long-term goals. This goal right here, the adaptation goal, may not ever change. I mean, this may be the same goal a tribe has for the next 100 years, continuing to adapt to climate change impacts as they continue to change. So that's a high-level goal that is always going to guide this program, or may always guide. And these things can be adjusted and tweaked and modified. But there also may be areas focused on not that aren't media specific. So there might be this E&O as education and outreach. So focusing on kind of the overall education outreach, systems, practices, program capacity building efforts. And then I also, with all the tribes I've been working with, I've been developing a general category that includes the administrative, financial, and other more general related capacity building efforts and needs. So there's goals associated with those as well. So in this case, I only included, climate was the only one I included more than one goal. All the other ones, well, I guess education outreach I did as well. So those are the goals. And so coming back to the requirements, this requirement, the gap work plans must be aligned with the ETEP long-term goals. So that's something that you would flesh out in your ETEP, making sure that when you have those goals that we just went through, that your gap work plan is also meeting those goals as well. So if you're putting things in your gap work plan that you can't, that aren't in alignment with any of the goals you have, so you have a particular task that just doesn't fit under any of those goals, then you need to have different goals, or you need to remove that task. So one thing needs to give or the other. The intermediate program development milestones and objectives are going to be what you're going to accomplish to achieve those goals. So let's pull this back up, and this is the series of objectives right here. Really, this is the blueprint for your ETEP strategic work plan. This is the meat of it. This is the blueprint for your department, for your office, to be able to accomplish those goals in the most efficient, most effective manner possible. So there's a series of objectives listed by year. A recurring objective, so let's say if you had ongoing outdoor ambient air quality monitoring activities going on year in, year out, you would actually repeat that activity for each year so that you can make sure you're allocating sufficient staffing and funding resources toward that objective, which is going to accomplish probably a goal that's something like decreasing outdoor air pollution or eliminating outdoor air pollution. So each goal is listed by year. It also And it's also listed by, in this column E, it's listed by area, so you could sort them by area as well. I'll show you some of the functionality in a moment. Let's come back to these requirements. Another element of this is that the tribe's plans to manage authorized environmental programs must be included in the ETEP. So within this, let me show you how that's done in this particular plan. So let's scroll down to the bottom of this and go to the next table. Let's flesh this one out. And this is a summary. This table right here is a summary of the tribe's plans to manage authorized EPA programs, and the tribe's plans to manage federal EPA or federal environmental statutory programs. So if there's authorities under the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, or RCRA, the tribe wants to assume that may be TAS or delegation. So TAS is going to be treatment as a state authority, and that might be something like developing water quality standards and implementing those water quality standards. So this table itself doesn't actually include the specific plans. It just indicates whether there are plans or not. So in the cases of climate, and in cases of these four, they're not applicable because there really are no opportunities for a tribe to manage authorized environmental programs, at least none that I'm aware of. There are opportunities under the Clean Air Act, which are going to fall under the waste category, or I'm sorry, the air category. So there are specific milestones. So from my perspective, if a tribe has plans to manage an authorized EPA program or an authorized federal environmental statutory program, there's going to be objectives and milestones associated with that. So it might be pursuing TAS for developing ambient air quality standards. And another one might be developing those ambient air quality standards. Might be obtaining TAS for administering Title V permits. So there's going to be specific objectives within the meat of the plan above. And again, water indicates that there are some objectives above. And then waste, there are some opportunities for a tribe to assume some authority under RCRA and other waste-related federal environmental statutes. So an example would be a tribe assuming some responsibility for doing underground storage tank inspections. So and in this case, if there's none at this time because there's no examples included. Okay, so that's how that's addressed. And also the needed assistance to achieve goals and milestones/objectives. My perspective on this is that if a tribe needs assistance to achieve its goals and objectives, then it's going to actually have objectives to pursue those particular resources. So if a tribe needs training, it's going to have an objective to pursue that training. If the tribe needs funding, it's going to have an objective to pursue that funding, or technical assistance, or so on and so forth. So those would be embedded within the actual objectives and milestones, which I think that's in alignment with this document being streamlined. The other three requirements, so there's the EPA program priorities and management requirements. Those would be, I think, can be actually embedded within this plan. The EPA may choose to provide those separately, and they have been in some cases, but the EPA could choose to embed their particular priorities into the strategic work plan, ETEP strategic work plan. And if the inventory of regulated entities has not been completed, that could be included as an objective. And then the identification of mutual roles and responsibilities is actually shown right here. So if there's an objective that's listed in here, whose role is it? Is it one or the other, or is it both? So you could put tribe, EPA, or tribe and EPA. One thing that is not listed explicitly on that slide is the EPA does want to see the capacity indicators, if applicable. They want to see kind of a crosswalk of how the goals are going to be used to accomplish or meet capacity needs that are found in the GAP guidance. And so the capacity indicators, where applicable, are included from the GAP guidance document. So, as a reminder, not everything, but so the gap guidance in the gap guidance list of capacity indicators is not exclusive. So the tribe could come up with capacity indicators that are eligible for funding under the GAP program and that are not actually listed already. And this is part of the process of going through that. So what I recommend is you develop this draft and then you go back to the EPA and you say, you have them go through these objectives one by one and ask them what is actually eligible for GAP funding and what is not. Doesn't mean you're going to get GAP funding for it, but at least you know whether it's actually eligible. And if it's not eligible, then you can ask why is it not eligible and find out whether it can be tweaked or modified to make it eligible. Maybe just something about the language that makes it not eligible. Maybe it can be reframed in terms of it being a capacity building rather than an implementation objective. Or maybe it's just an activity that's not covered under GAP or under any EPA programs. So I would also ask too, if it's not GAP eligible, are there any other EPA funding sources they believe it would be eligible for, so that you can be aware of where else you possibly can pursue one through. All right, so let me just also just show you, provide a little more demonstration about what can be done with this as well, why it's such a powerful tool. So unlike a Word document, you can filter and sort things. So you can filter things in alphabetical order. So let's filter out, and let's just say we have a meeting with our staff member who's focused on the tribe's climate change efforts. So we want to filter everything else out and be able to have a conversation with them that just focuses on what the climate change goals and objectives are. So we go through this and we unselect everything else and we just focus on climate change. And let's say too that we don't want to know, we just want to focus on this year or this upcoming year. So let's say this is fiscal year 15-16. And so we want to make sure that we are making progress toward the objectives the tribe has established. So we filter everything out. We just look at 2016's objectives for the climate change program. We have that conversation, and you can filter this one out as well. So there's lots of ways these things can be manipulated and sorted and just very easily and clearly to be able to communicate these things with staff members and with other stakeholders as well. Now, one thing that has been brought up is that not everybody wants to go through a spreadsheet or have access to a spreadsheet. So, how can this be printed? How can this be shared? How can somebody update it using track changes, which is not actually a function available in Excel? Well, at least it's not a good function in Excel. So you can convert this into a Word document or printable format as well. I'm not going to actually go through the details of doing that. I don't want to spend the time doing that, but I just want to show you it pretty quickly. I mean, I could have done this in 2 minutes or less, where I just selected those things and copied and pasted them. Well, actually, that's just really what it was. It was copy and pasting it. It was putting this in a landscape format, making sure this document was the right size. And then I can print this out. I can submit this to staff members, to leadership, to the EPA, enable track changes. And then if a tribe or somebody wants to make a change, let's say they want to delete something, you can use track changes to see what's going on and make additions. So a way that this can kind of easily be shared and converted into a Word format. A copy of that document is available online as well. So some of the more powerful stuff in this too is being able to manage your staffing. So if we unfilter this, I did a hypothetical. Really the requirements are all within these first 5 columns. So you need the year because you need to show the time frame. You need the objective. You need to show the capacity indicator numbers. You need to show the role. And for organization purposes, you need to have the area. I have included a category because that makes it a little easier to sort. I have some kind of general categories that I've used to be able to kind of quickly filter specific activities. And then you can add a lot of other information as well. So it's just really customizable. And as you can see, these things are aligned with what you may actually include in your GAP work plan. So, or you may have pulled some of these from an existing work plan as well. So this is where if you can include that. If you put some outputs and deliverables, you need to include that already. If there's outcomes, due dates, primary staff responsibilities, you can add work years as well. You can list other sources, estimated costs, notes, links, references, lots of information that you can include. You also can run reports if this is set up and you populate it. If you, let's say for 2016, you actually went through all of the objectives and you estimated the number of work years per staff member and you totaled them up, you could run a pivot table report very quickly and see uh, how many work years are associated with each staff member. So in this case, you'll see that the environmental technician is at 1.12 work years, and the environmental director, they're both perhaps being overutilized. So you may need to delegate some of those responsibilities or shift them to next year. So that's really how this is a prioritization tool. You go through, you fill in this information, it helps you understand what can and cannot be accomplished based on your estimates. So then you could go back here and see that, okay, well, the environmental director, let's filter out the environmental director activities, know that we need to shift something to next year, and you could, there's ways to hide these. You don't have to scroll back and forth. I'll just do that really quickly. Let's hide that. Let's hide these guys as well. Hide the due dates. And then we can see these right next to each other. Let's make that a little smaller. And then we can go through and state, okay, well, according to this table, the environmental director is at 1.2 work years. So we have to shift some activities. So what can be shifted maybe to next year? And I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily go down. You know what, maybe we didn't actually get the funding for the integrated resource management plan, so we're going to shift that to 2017. And let's go back and let's delete that. Or we can leave it there, that's fine. But it's shifted to 2017. Let's update this table. And then it updates the went from 1.22 to 1.06. So that's how that helps you prioritize and manage your staffing and all the objectives that you have in a given year or given time frame. So just to show you that that's, if you don't want to work with Excel, I've actually done a version that's not in Excel. So let me close this guy. So hopefully that was just an error for the Excel. Can everybody hear me still? Please just respond. I want to make sure I'm not having any kind of ongoing issue. Leanne, are you able to hear me? Can you just type in the chat box real quick? Hmm. Hey, Leanne, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
I typed it out in the chat box as well.
Oh, sorry. I was getting really worried because nobody was responding in the chat box. Or
Or
maybe.
did you not get it on the?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I just
Okay, okay.
I panicked for a moment because I thought that I was gonna have to. I thought I crashed for some reason.
Oh no no. I'll text you if anything like that happens.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
All right, buddy. Well, I'm glad you're all still with me. Uh, so let me show you a Word version of kind of a similar thing. So here is a Word example. This has all the same exact elements and it's just included in a Word functionality. and it's just less. It's not as easy to update, to manipulate. It's not as you can't really use it as much as a management tool, but I still like having these things listed as bullet points rather than as a full-out narrative, just because it just makes it more manageable. It's more of a blueprint. It makes it more actionable. It's more likely to be a living plan rather than a static plan that sits on a shelf. And I have a version of that included with I have a version of that included on my website with instructions as well. And I'll be resending that out after and reposting that after this webinar. So one other thing I want to show you an example of, I talked about there being developing a strategic plan as well, and I want to show you a strategic plan template and what that looks like. So this is really, this is the overarching plan that guides you. So the missing element of the ETEP strategic work plan is really just like the vision, the purpose, like the overall of where we're going. So this is just the framework. I don't have an example. I've done these for tribes, but I didn't request permission necessarily to show theirs. But you kind of state your mission, 1 to 2 sentences, your vision. You'd have a series of core values, probably 5 to 7, a series of long-term overall goals, and then a series of program area goals, which are actually the same thing you're going to see on the ETEP strategic work plan as well. And there's a process that you go through with that. I'm going to actually provide a little more information about that process in a moment. But you may want to have a strategic planning retreat to gather that information. May want to send out a questionnaire. And it's an opportunity to get everybody together and get everybody on the same page and to inspire people. You want to hopefully have an inspiring mission and vision for your department that helps motivate people in the work that they're doing. Okay, so I'm gonna briefly share with you the new service that I've developed that is available to tribes, that actually has a deadline to sign up for because it's on a set period of time. And then I'm going to go through the ETEPs and GAP work plans, as I mentioned, both for focused on developing. If you're in the phase of developing your ETEP, the language you possibly can use, and actually have a couple of examples, or I have some examples of that. And then also if you're at the point where you're implementing and updating your ETEP, I do have a some sample commitments for that as well. So I'm going to get to that after I show you this. So I recently decided that I've been working directly with a lot of tribes on developing their ETEP strategic, or really on their ETEP projects. And that's been very successful. It's been very beneficial. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that, and there's other interest and demand for that as well. But it's really, there's limitations to doing those projects one on one by one, because I can only work with so many tribes at a time, and it seems like there's a lot of tribes that do like this approach that I'm developing. And so, if I continue to work with tribes with on their ETEPs one at a time, like I'm never going to be able to even probably work with even half the tribes in that. I just don't have enough time to do so. And then there's also the cost. So these projects have been ranging anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000, and not all tribes have the budget to support that. It's A tribe could request supplemental gap funding to get some additional funding beyond their base funding if they can't afford to allocate that much toward a consultant or contractor. But that's just a bit of a process. And plus, there's also some tribes that really would like to try it on their own and just could use some guidance and some assistance. So this is kind of a lower cost opportunity that's like a guided training series that also links tribes together, and I'll kind of talk about those benefits in a moment. But so it's a 3-month, 12 module guided online training series. Each module is going to be 60 to 90 minutes long, and it's going to cover the process of developing a baseline needs assessment, developing and implementing an updated an ETEP strategic work plan, and also developing and updating and utilizing an overarching strategic plan for your department as well. The schedule is it's going to start at the beginning of February and go through April, so it'll be 3 months. And through this, there'll be access to resources so the templates are available online. Anybody can access those at any time, so that's not necessarily new. If there are changes that are made to these templates before I do my next training or webinar, you would have immediate access to those. But some other things that aren't actually accessible to everybody, um, I've been working with, so the person on the phone who I've been talking to is actually my intern, Leanne, and she's been helping me develop this catalog, this ETEP Strategic Work Plan catalog that includes a series of objectives, potential objectives that you can use to populate your ETEP strategic work plan. And you know, if I scroll down, I actually got to zoom back out. So let me zoom back out so you can see everything a little better. But if I scroll down to the bottom of this, there are, well, I think as of right now, so these are series objectives that have what I've been done is I've taken them from past projects, I've taken them from the gap guidance, I've assigned areas to each one. So there's an administrative area. Well, some of them are aligned with the gap guidance, some are aligned with the tribes I've been working with, but so there might be air, water, waste, environmental emergencies, general education outreach, climate, uh, and then for a lot of them, I have capacity indicator numbers already linked to them, possible roles, if you want to subcategorize them as well. And so this is a growing list. Right now, I believe it's at 1,300 possible objectives that you could include. And then we're going to be working on developing a catalog of overarching goals for these objectives and also a catalog of description of program areas. And so these are being taken from the gap guidance, from projects I've worked on in the past, also from other grant programs out there. So we've been looking through the Clean Water Act grants, Tribal Wildlife Grant for the Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Reclamation grants. So we're going through those and extracting out objectives and milestones that are eligible under those grant programs. And in this catalog, it'll actually show the source of where it came from so that you know where, if it's associated with a particular funding opportunity, you know to go to that funding opportunity to possibly pursue funding for pursuing that objective. So that's one resource that's going to be available to people who are participating in the training. Another one is, so when I do strategic planning with tribes, I actually develop a strategic planning questionnaire that helps them evaluate or discern their mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives. And so what I will make available is this that I've already developed, and I actually will have the upgraded version of SurveyMonkey where I can prepare reports of the findings. So with the regular version, you don't have the ability to prepare like Excel reports or detailed manipulatable reports on these things. So I would then make that available, and then I would share the results as well. So this is where, if you're working on developing a strategic plan and you want to utilize this questionnaire, you can provide this link to your staff members. You'll have a unique link for your tribe, and whenever you tell me, I will provide you the results of that you then can take and use how you want in developing your ETEP, your strategic plan. And I'll be walking you through the process of how to develop a strategic plan and what actually is included in it as well. The training, this online training series or this service would actually also include up to 4 hours of direct consulting assistance, which would be available for up to 3 months after the training itself is concluded. And that would be me directly looking at possibly a draft, talking with you on the phone about your particular needs, your direction, your program areas. So whatever assistance you may need, up to 4 hours of that. I think a really unique thing about this would be a connection with, and a really beneficial thing is connection with cohort members. So there's going to be a cohort of tribes that'll be involved in this that are all going through this process at the same point, at the same time. And so I'm going to facilitate a group email conversation so we can share ideas, we can share challenges, concerns with one another, so we can benefit from each other's both learnings and roadblocks. And if there's some kind of common challenges out there or common concerns that need to be addressed at a higher level with the EPA or something like that, then there's actually going to be at least 6 tribes that are going to have that same concern, and to be able to kind of communicate that with 6 tribes or more tribes, I think it's going to be more powerful, and it's going to ensure a more consistent resolution of some of these common concerns. There'll be additional periodic Q&A webinars, so there'll probably 1 to 3 Q&A webinars that are going to be half an hour to an hour each. They'll just be an open session to be able to, so in addition to the direct consulting assistance, you have an opportunity to ask me questions during these Q&A webinars. And then there'll be ongoing access to the video recorders of each webinar module. So I understand that not every single person is going to be able to participate in every webinar all the time, so there'll be that access to the video recordings, and that you could play those for stakeholders and staff members within your department as well. I mean, so if if you are signed up for this, you could have everybody in the room watching this if you want. So here's just a summary of the training module topics, and also just so you know, I've included in the handouts, I've included a complete description of the ETEP training series. It's downloadable. It's just an Adobe Acrobat file or a PDF file. And so just in a summary of this, understanding the ETEP requirements, and that's going through that in a lot more detail than I've even gone through here, so you fully understand what's actually required of you. And this going through all the phases of developing a baseline needs assessment, providing a template and the steps to develop that, walking through that process, doing the scoping process for your ETEP, so identifying the priority program areas, and then fleshing out that ETEP strategic work plan. So you're going to take that information you gathered within the baseline needs assessment process, and then you're going to identify and select goals and objectives. You'll have access to that catalog that I developed, so you can just cut and paste ones that have already been crafted. And also preparing the strategic plan, which also could involve conducting strategic planning meetings and retreat, and I can kind of share with you that process and even provide a template for a potential retreat that you could have conducted on your own, and providing access to that questionnaire as well. Going through how to obtain input, feedback, engagement, and partnerships through this process. I mean, that's really how to maximize and make this process as powerful as possible, is meeting with people, getting their input, going to your staff, getting their input, their feedback, and their engagement is going to make them more committed. It's going to make them and your department more successful in achieving its goals. Seeking tribal council input, feedback, and engagement. Other departments that have overlapping responsibilities or that have some environmental issues or opportunities that are under their particular authority, and then also seeking outside partnerships as well. There'll be modules focused on utilizing the strategic plan and ETEP strategic work plan. Some of it includes kind of obtaining that feedback and input on an ongoing basis, but this is kind of utilizing it for guiding your staff, going through and populating it, printing it, putting all the staff time in there, using pivot tables. So all the things you possibly could do with this, the functionality of it, and how you utilize and update it on an ongoing basis as well. So some of the ETEP development needs that I've kind of seen out there are just really there's a need for a clear and guided process for developing an ETEP, and that's really what this is trying to, well, that's what all of these are trying to meet. I've also found that there's a need for ongoing ETEP development support. So not just, I've been offering these webinars one at a time here and there, and for me, this is kind of a way for me to market my capabilities and services, while at the same time providing some free resources that are beneficial to everybody. But I can't provide this ongoing support, and the EPA support is kind of limited in their perspective. They're limited in their perspective is on their programs and their priorities. They're limited in how they can help you crafting the tribe's programs and priorities and goals and objectives. And so they can provide some support, but it's kind of limited. So, this is an ability to have some ongoing support, at least for 6 months, and to really be guided in developing a usable template that is truly a living management tool. One thing that I found in talking with most tribes is that they're concerned that they're going to miss something. Like there's going to be some possible goals and objectives or some needs out there that they're going to miss. And so this really provides, through the catalog and through the trainings, it's going to make sure that you're exposed to all the possible goals and objectives out there to make sure that you are incorporating everything into your plan. So, the ideas for the environmental and program needs, and also the ideas for possible program areas, goals, and objectives. It's a segmented, so believe there's also a need for a segmented, extended, and digestible hands-on training for this. So, being spaced out in a manner so that we start with a baseline needs assessment, and that's done over a module or two, and you have an opportunity to work on that and flesh it out over the series of 2 weeks, and then progress into doing each phase of the ETEP and having space in between and being able to focus on one aspect of it at a time rather than have all of it be thrown at you at once and have to go back to the office and be like, okay, well, there's tons of things I need to do, and it's overwhelming. It also can provide training for multiple staff members and stakeholders, so you could broadcast these webinars. You could go into a conference room and play the live broadcast or video with all of your staff members so everybody's on the same page, and then that actually can make it so that you have multiple staff members who are involved in crafting this and updating it. And then also I think there needs to be some leverage to effectively address concerns and challenges. So as each tribe is going through these, developing their ETEPs, if there's kind of these common issues and challenges, that a series of tribes can bring these concerns and challenges to the EPA rather than one tribe at a time. And I believe that if 6 or more tribes bring a concern or challenge to the EPA, it will get addressed more consistently and more efficiently and quickly than it would with just one tribe bringing it to their project officer. And then that's going to be more beneficial for all tribes too. Okay, so that's, those are the benefits. The cost and registration. There's a series of costs based on, so for me, it's like it has to be cost effective for me to spend the amount of time doing this. So if I need a minimum of 6 tribes to register for me to make this cost effective. If I can't get a minimum of 6 tribes, then I'm not going to be able to offer the training. However, if there are more and more tribes that are participating, then my costs per tribe go down. And so you can see here that if there's more than 24 tribes that participate, that it would be $2,500 per tribe. And if you are interested, there's kind of two phases. You could pre-register right away. It's important, I think, to let me know that you are interested in getting me the information so I can learn a little more about your situation. But really, to be officially registered, and that's what the requirement is, I need a minimum of 6 official registrations by January 19th, which includes a $1,000 deposit that's received. The deposit is non-refundable except if the minimum threshold is not met. So if for some reason you register and 6 tribes don't sign up and the training is not going to be offered, then you would receive a full refund of that. And then the balance would be due a month after this. So by February 19th, the balance of whatever the remaining cost is. So if it got to where there was 18 tribes, the balance would then be $2,000 to make up the $3,000 cost. And so you'd submit that. So let me just stop real quick and look at some of the questions. I was looking at the wrong place before. on some of the questions. So one question I had was, have you come across the possibility of creating a new capacity indicator, especially for a mature tribe who is basically continuing a program such as ongoing monitoring of their water quality and quantity? So that's a good question, and the I mean, you'd have when I'm developing these, there's definitely new capacity indicators that don't have one associated with them that's being developed. So when I'm developing these, I will associate them with any capacity indicator they possibly could be associated with. Continuing the ongoing water quality and quantity monitoring is probably going to be covered under your Clean Water Act grant, so would be 106. And you don't necessarily need a capacity indicator associated with it for it to be in your ETEP. So that's also one thing too. In terms of the scope of the ETEP, strategic work plan, the strategic plan itself, I actually recommend including your entire, whatever is under the scope of your environmental department, even non-environmental stuff. So let's say your environmental department includes a TIPO, like I would include that as well because you can't properly plan for and manage your environmental programs and objectives unless you see everything that you're possibly looking at. So, you would include your Clean Water Act 106 monitoring activities, and you would indicate that that's being funded by 106. There are ways to have some capacity indicators that are for ongoing activities that are just kind of cycled, like education outreach. One example would be if you're focusing on waste management or waste related education outreach, you just cycle through the focus every year. So instead of focusing on events like doing cleanup events or doing an Earth Day, you focus on cycling through composting in 2016. Next year you focus on recycling in 2017. Year after that you focus on household hazardous waste. Year after that you focus on legal dumping, and then you actually, in 4 years, the composting one you did in 2016, those materials are out of date and those activities are out of date. So you need to come back and redesign, redevelop, repilot those activities and those materials so you actually can come back and look at those again in 4 years. So that's how you kind of cycle through and continue ongoing education outreach. So it's kind of a roundabout question or answer to your question. So hopefully that helps. And we could always have a separate call later on if you want to discuss that further. So I do want to get into the ETEP and GAP work plans right now. So these are some considerations for your preparing your GAP work plan if you're at the phase of developing an ETEP. And after that, I'm going to talk about if you already have an existing ETEP, what are some considerations. So one thing is to consider is that the development and format options are supposed to be flexible. This is emphasized throughout the guidance that that the ETEPs may vary from tribe to tribe, the specific format and approach, maximum flexibility is provided, and there's some examples of that, but realize that these are just examples. So none of these examples are prescriptive or how you need to do it, they're how you could do it. So a narrative document is not required by the GAP guidance. So I would personally, you could have it be a narrative document, but I would not, in my work plan, I would not state that it's a narrative document. I'd just say I'm developing an ETEP. I think it's important to focus on producing a living, usable management tool. So putting in the word living, you can even put that kind of language to re-emphasize it, but just, focusing your whole process of developing an ETEP on making sure that this is the result, is a living, usable management tool, something that's not going to sit on the shelf. When you're crafting this, I'm seeing in a lot of tribes that they're either having something like a joint cover letter with signatures from the tribal council or a tribal council resolution. So the GAP guidance itself requires the support of senior tribal officials, senior EPA and tribal officials. It does not require a tribal council resolution, which can be a difficult thing to get for a lot of people. And I also think it doesn't really support this being a living document. If you get a tribal council resolution, that's usually going to be something more static. They may look at that more closely. A signature itself is not actually explicitly required by the GAP guidance. So you got to talk to your project officer whether you need a signature. You're going to need some indication of support. So it might just be that maybe the elected tribal council meets and they review it and they indicate in their minutes that they've reviewed it and they're supportive of it. Maybe that's sufficient. Uh, a letter signed by the chairperson should meet this requirement. So just having your chairperson have a cover letter that says that they're supportive of it. I recommend emphasize that the support is for the joint planning process itself instead of the plan. Like you don't want to have a plan and have it be supported as if it's not going to change, because this plan is supposed to be living. It's supposed to change on an ongoing basis. So I would recommend having the language of that support focus on the support for the joint planning process and for the plan as it stands, with the understanding that it's going to continue to be updated by the responsible people, whether that be the program managers, basically the environmental department. So including language the that they're supportive of, of the plan and of the ongoing uh, revision of updating of the plan by whatever responsible department. So I emphasize their support. I also want to emphasize officials, because officials are going to vary from tribe to tribe, and so you'll need to identify those. In some cases, typically the officials are going to be the people who have the authority to assign an agreement regarding a matter. The tribe can delegate the authority in limited circumstances, for signing agreements for a particular matter. So, could be in your tribe, it's just a tribal chairperson is the only one who can sign agreements, or that an agreement can only be signed by, maybe needs multiple signatures, or maybe the tribal administrator has the authority to sign agreements for particular things. In some cases, the environmental director or program manager may actually have that authority, and that's really going to vary from tribe to tribe. And when you're doing this, if you are planning on including training costs or consultant costs, if you're at this point, you definitely want to include those. And that PDF that I included provides you, actually, I can pull it up real quick. So one thing that I included that I thought may be helpful was some estimated costs for add-on services. So, and that's actually one other kind of feature of this as well, is these are estimated prices for additional services. So for if you had me directly working with you on conducting your baseline needs assessment, preparing your report, developing your ETEP strategic work plan. So basically I'm working with you, I'm gathering this information, and I'm drafting these on your behalf. With strategic planning, I'm drafting your strategic plan, I'm gathering the information. This could be with or without a strategic planning retreat, and there's also an option for additional consulting assistance as well. But if you got the developing an ETEP strategic work plan service, if you contracted with me to do that, and one either a baseline needs assessment or a strategic plan on top of it, you'd actually get the training at no cost. So anybody who contracts with me before the training begins to do that will essentially get the training for free. But if you don't want the training, if you just want direct assistance, and these are the costs for that, estimated costs, so that will vary from tribe to tribe. It doesn't include travel costs as well, and I did provide an asterisk that provided an estimate of what they could be. That just kind of depends on how many days and the location. So that's downloadable. I'll make that's available on the website as well. All right, let me show you an example of. So I spent a little time right before this webinar preparing a sample work plan, and I just put the critical information in here. I'm going to make this available as well. Where I put, this is really like, for me, I kind of went through what would be, if I was working with a tribe, or if I was a tribe and I wanted to utilize this approach, what would be like the ideal work plan? And this mirrors what was included when I went through the steps of doing an ETEP project. So you have conducting the baseline needs assessment and preparing the report, doing the strategic planning with retreats and meetings, preparing your a draft for your living ETEP strategic work plan, that includes those elements that are required, obtaining EPA feedback on the plan. So this is important right here. When developing an ETEP strategic work plan, or TEP. So in Region 9, they're calling the component number 1, they're calling it a tribal environmental plan because it focuses on the tribe's programs and priorities. Uh, I recommend requesting from the EPA a determination on the eligibility of each of the objectives of the eligibility for gap funding. So having them go through and indicate whether each of the objectives you have listed in the plan are eligible for gap funding, and if they're not, and you think they are, asking them why. Because it might be that maybe it's just the language needs to be tweaked, or maybe it's just something that's just not eligible at all, and but maybe they can identify another funding source that it could be eligible for. So kind of ongoing water quality monitoring would be something that they would say, okay, well, that's not eligible for GAP. You may have developed your initial water assessment, but you're going to need to pursue Clean Water Act 106 funding to do that on an ongoing basis. So I think that's something where, I think that's critical to have a workable plan, because you have objectives in here that you are assuming you're going to be able to get funded for under GAP, and you can't, then that changes the nature of your plan. So getting that up front is going to then help you make those adjustments or seek other funding sources as needed. The review and updating of the inventory of regulated entities is a requirement, and so it's initially going to be provided by the EPA. I put in here to obtain and incorporate the EPA program priorities into the draft ETEP, and that may take different forms. That in Region 9, that's taken a particular format. They provided this list of their kind of areas of responsibility or potential areas of responsibility. So, that's something where I said you could possibly include in the ETEP as objectives themselves, but the EPA may want to include that as separate. Negotiate and document the EPA and tribal mutual roles and responsibilities, which I think is a negotiation. I mean, you don't, the EPA is not going to want, they're going to commit to what they want to commit to, and the tribal as well, and there may be some negotiation behind that in terms of fleshing that out. And then finally, obtaining the support for the joint planning process from senior and tribal EPA officials. I put as an example a cover letter signed by the EPA and a tribal official. So I did this, I did this just this morning. So I just did the bare bones. I just put the commitments and outputs and deliverables, and I also put the capacity indicators. I didn't flesh the rest out. There's other information out there. So this is just, for me, an ideal one. I'm not guaranteeing that I'm not guaranteeing your project officer is going to accept everything. I believe it makes a lot of sense. I believe it's in alignment with the GAP guidance, but it's still going to be dependent upon your GAP grant project officer actually accepting it. So I'll make that available. Actually, I'll drop it if you want to download that. I just dropped it, just uploaded, so you could download that right now. And so let's actually go to this first. So here's some considerations for updating and utilizing an ETEP. So if you're at the point where you've actually have a draft ETEP in place, there should always be something in your GAP work plans about updating, reviewing, and utilizing your ETEP. So ETEPs are supposed to be reviewed and revised at least annually. If it's not being updated at least annually, it's, in my opinion, it's not a living plan. Like that's an anti-living plan. That's a static plan. My recommendation for this is updating it right before preparing your GAP work plan. And in the training itself, I'll go through kind of why and how to do that. So there's kind of an alignment there of going through and including all your staffing and reprioritizing, and then it actually makes preparing your GAP work plan very easy if it's done right. So you're doing almost the same thing you're doing with your preparing your GAP work plan. You're fleshing out all the commitments, all your staffing, all of your deliverables. So if you do that within your ETEP, you have that information already there, and then you actually can see it over the next 4 years, how it actually relates to your future objectives, where just doing it in your GAP work plans, you only have the context of this year. And what I've done in the past, and what a lot of you probably have done as well, and this might be changing some more, is when I'm developing my GAP work plan, I tend to go to, when I used to do it, I would first usually go back to my last year's work plan, and I would cut and paste and there really wouldn't be as much flow and evolution in my plans as there could be. And it's obviously important to get funding and continue some important activities, but I think it's also equally, if not more important, to make sure that your programs are progressing toward the goals that you've established through going through the strategic planning and ETEP development process. I also think that there should be some consideration and incorporation into your work plan of utilizing your ETEP on an ongoing basis. So your ETEP is a capacity building tool. So using it, I believe, is inherently capacity building. So there can be some commitments associated with how you're using that to guide your staff and guide your program in their capacity building efforts. I think that you could also include some commitments involving seeking the buy-in input of others and developing partnerships. You already mentioned that you can use this for preparing your gap work plan, which is part of the update process, and but also in utilizing your ETEP for preparing other grant work plans. So if you really do a full ETEP, which is what I'd recommend, it's going to be the most powerful, then you can actually plug in the information from your ETEP into your other grants. So your Clean Water Act 106 and 319 grants, if you have a Cleaner Act 103 or 105 grants, if you have a tribal wildlife grant, so BIA grants, these other grants are going to have objectives that are in your ETEP strategic work plan. So really, including an ETEP commitments in your work plan every single year is a must. Making sure you're allocating sufficient time, resources, and staffing toward doing that update. I believe it's one of the most, if not the most important thing you can be doing for your department. So let me show you an example of a work plan that covers that. So again, I didn't include, the only thing I focused on was I put the capacity indicators, commitments, and deliverables. And this is, I can't guarantee your project officer is going to accept this, but this is what I think is in alignment with the GAP guidance of what can and should be included. I believe that there should be, your baseline needs assessment is something that I think can and should be reviewed on an annual basis, and it could be tweaked too, so updated as needed. But coming back to that and seeing if conditions and needs have changed, which then is going to influence how your ETEP is going to change. Doing the same thing with your strategic plan. So the strategic plan for your tribal environmental department, looking at the mission, vision, values, goals, maybe reconducting a SWOT analysis and tweaking it, making adjustments as needed because conditions and things may have changed. This third one, reviewing and updating your living ETEP strategic work plan or tribal environmental plan. So I didn't put and updated as needed. This needs to be updated. It should be updated every single year. And in the case of the plans that I developed, like they're updated to be perpetual 4-year plans. So in drafting your initial plan, you develop a 4-year plan, let's say covering 2016 and 2019. By the end of 2016, you would actually update it to archive 2016 objectives and update all the objectives for 17, 18, and 19, and then add objectives for 2020. So you always have a 4-year plan. So this is never, you never spend nearly as much time as you spent initially on the updates, and it helps you keep your pulse on the environmental office. Where are you at? Where do you want to go? How do you stay in alignment with those goals? How do you maximize your resources to achieve your goals and objectives? And this is how you do it. And then making sure you're dedicating sufficient resources to do that on an ongoing basis, and also reviewing and updating as needed the inventory of regulated entities because they may change. That may be just a quick review. EPA program priorities, you can ask them if they have any changes to those, and then the mutual roles and responsibilities. So just at least reviewing those may need some tweaks. I think the meat of what you're going to do and where you need to dedicate some time is here. And you may also include some of those other kind of utilization activities, but it's just, this can be a standalone This could be a standalone component, or you can include it into kind of like a department administration type component as well. So let me drop a copy of that so that's uploading right now. All right, so that's the end of that. Let me just check. Are there let's see, any questions on those? So are there any questions on the gap work plan considerations? And let me see. I'm still getting used to using GoToMeeting. Let me just make sure okay, there we go. Okay, so didn't see any questions. All right, so there's just a brief overview of, so Prosper Sustainably, and I offer other services as well. So other planning and strategy development services, resource management plans. I'm working on an integrated solid waste management plan right now. I'm also doing some environmental codes drafting as well at the moment. I do grant writing and management. I've been successful there and talking to some tribes about that. Project management, planning, coordination, feasibility studies and assessments, new ventures and business planning. So there's a link to all the services. And I have a lot of different skills that can help tribes' needs, and I feel like one of the few people out there who actually do kind of understand tribes' needs and have these capabilities. So I appreciate your time